1% of dudes rapping, they ain't nice as me. 98% ain't live the same type of life as me. The judge gave me life and then they sent me where the life is be. That level 4 with depth and vice, the type of stuff they like to see. Two choices, fight or flee. I refuse to die a chump. I never been a mark, but damn, it's scary when that riot jump. I seen dudes cry, get pumped, and some sexually brutalized. Knew a dude who lost his life and he was only doing 5 year-long racial fights when homie all you do is ride. Lonely days and nights up in a hole causing suicide. From the moment you arrive, you see the Mexican mafia, AB skinheads with big giant swastikas, pro-black philosophers, the BGF, the Kumi, and Muslims who will murk you from the nation to the Sunni. That MS was loony, quick to ride up on they rival. Even Christians went to church, hide knives up in a Bible. Political and tribal, the Crips and Damus, the Long Beach, the Hubs and the Dubs and the Grooves, the IE, the Bakersfield, the Dago Pyrus, the Hustlers quick to roll, the gangsters don't move, whatever click you choose.
This video was sponsored by Mitchell Law Firm. If you have a record or you happen to know somebody who has a record and that record is hindering or impeding the quality of employment they're able to obtain, I strongly suggest you seek the law services of Farrah Mitchell. Miss Mitchell is a criminal law attorney who specializes in record expungement. Her services are nationwide, meaning regardless of whatever state you may have been convicted in, she still may be able to help. She also offers various other legal services at an extremely reasonable rate. She can be contacted at 980-329-7568. So once again, I strongly suggest you contact her, get your record expunged, and get your life back in order. Say what's cracking, YouTube? It's your boy 16 to life, and I'm back like I'm on a parole violation. Yard down. So today we're doing another interview with a good friend of mine. He goes by the name of Fred. What's very unique about Fred, a lot of times you guys ask me about how does people fare when they're not from California. So Fred has a Detroit background and stuff, so I'll let him get into that, and we'll, during the course of the interview. But anyway, Fred, hey, thank you for coming on, sharing your story with me and my the people who watch my channel. How you doing, man? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm doing good, man. It's good to be with you, man. I think we met up at CMC. It might have been like 2017 because I actually paroled in September 2017.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah, I'm originally from Detroit, man, and I went to California like in the early 90s. So I was out there prior to my incarceration. But yeah, but again, that's where I met Chill. I met Chill in the county jail initially, and then again through doing time, we were at 2 institutions, Ironwood and also CMC prior to my parole.
Right. And so Fred, describe what it was like for you. So were you born and raised in Detroit?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I'm born and raised in Detroit, man. And like I said, I had family in California. So I would, frequently, I would say probably like a couple summers from the year of 1991, during the riots. And then I would go visit. And the last time that I did go visit is the year that I actually got incarcerated. Yeah.
Okay, and so let's go back a little bit. What was life like for you growing up in Detroit? You say you was born and raised out there, so give us a little bit of that background.
Oh man, Detroit was beautiful, man. With respect to that's my home city. A lot of camaraderie around most of the people in the neighborhood and what have you. Of course, there were gangs or cliques, but nothing like the that rose to the level of the gangs that were in Los Angeles. With the Bloods and Crips and the various other gangs, what have you. But yeah, it was a good time, man. I had a good childhood. I think for myself, my direction somewhat went off track when my parents separated when I was about 13 years old. But as far as my childhood growing up, it was a very good childhood, I would say.
And so, is there a particular area or neighborhood that you grew up in out there?
Well, I'm on the west side. Detroit is divided into different sides. You got west side, east side, north end, southwest Detroit. But I grew up on the west side. Exit 9. That's those that are from Detroit or familiar with Detroit. That's Joy Road area. So that's probably that's my area. I'm in the Joy Road district. Yeah.
And so you said that life was a little stable for you. What was like? Okay, so you mentioned how it was the difference between the gangs out there and the gangs in California. Describe the gangs out there in Detroit, and when you think you had a introduction to them, whether you joined or whether you just happened to see them in the neighborhood. Can you give us a little bit of the difference?
Well, I could say I would say this, man. Like the era that I grew up in, it wasn't so much gangs. You had more so, Detroit was known for being hustlers for the most part. We was about making money. And so the gangs or the cliques that they did have, like in the early '80s, they had like for example the YBI, Young Boys Incorporated. You may have heard of them, and various other groups. You had Joy Road Boys, Pony Boys, Pony Down, and what have you. But for the most part, although they were gangs, a lot of times it was about money. Even
Right.
those that were not affiliated with gangs, it was primarily about money. It was kind of like when I was coming up, one of the things that was one of the sayings that was like well known throughout Detroit was like Detroit versus everybody. We kind of did our own thing. Everybody was more like hustlers.
Right.
As far as like you said, the differences, I think of course Los Angeles was particularly different in that they had the Bloods and Crips, which were primarily gangs that were known for their distinct colors. Although, from my understanding, the colors weren't necessarily the reason behind it. Of course, it was about money as well, but it was a little different in that regard.
Right. And so, if you can remember growing up in Detroit, around the time that the movie Colors came out, because I don't believe today there's Crips and Bloods in Detroit, as far as to my understanding. So did did that have any impact on the Detroit gang culture at all, as far as you know?
That's interesting you say that, man, because actually there's a blood gang to my knowledge that does exist in Detroit today.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I found that when I came back, that was something that was different. That wasn't something that in my era that we did. But there is today that the California reach has extended, as worldwide. But that was something that they do have today that I found was significantly different than when I was here before.
So you say you found your life going on a slightly different path when your parents separated. Now looking back on everything, what do you think was the kind of cause, and how did your life change?
I would say the cause. I think, well, of course, when you grow up in a two-family household, man, anytime that's interrupted, that's a change. For myself at least, that was a significant change because that's all I knew. Both my parents being together, but when they separated, I think the primary change that was the catalyst for me being, more open to being exposed to a lot of things was the leeway that I had being with my father. I stayed with my father in Detroit. My mother ended up moving. She left and moved to initially Ann Arbor, and then later she had moved to Philadelphia. But I think the freedom that I experienced being with my father in Detroit allowed me to be exposed to a lot of things that I otherwise, I don't believe I would have been exposed to if had my parents still been together. I actually, for those people that are familiar with Detroit, I attended Cass Technical High School. Out of the eighth grade, I had went to Halley Middle School, took a test, got into Cass High School, which was considered one of the three schools at that time that accepted, not necessarily gifted, but those that had the wherewithal to get into those schools through taking an assessment test. You had Cass, Renaissance, and King at the time, and I made it into Cass. And again, I think it was my ninth grade year, entering into my 10th grade year, is when my parents separated, and that had a lot to do with taking me off the trajectory of, I guess you can say, doing the right thing and just kind of being exposed to the street more so than I otherwise would have been.
Right. And Fred, that's one thing that when we met, right, and throughout the course of our friendship, that's one thing that I always found intriguing and interesting about you from day one. Your intelligence always stood out, man. And I think it may be a little bit ignorant of us sometimes, because I would look at a brother like you and say, "Dang, man, how did he get up in here?" Like, assuming that a dude with intelligence can't make a mistake. But that was something that always intrigued me about you, because also, like, you was not a blood, you was not a Crip, and so it was always something that was interesting. And also something else I found interesting when you was talking about how your life changed once your parents separated or divorced or whatever. I was assuming, because a lot of times in a separation, the children will go with the mother, and then they will have more leeway with the mother, because normally the father is the disciplinarian. But you said you went with your father. How did you have more freedom with your father?
I think what it was, man, to be honest, I think my father was kind of going with the difficulty of dealing with the separation in and of itself, caused him having to deal with that as an adult, uh, allowed him to kind of, I don't want to say neglect, because I wasn't neglected in whatso, by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that also the fact that I was a boy and I was becoming of age, I was a young teenager. So therefore, I think all those dynamics allow for me to have that freedom, that I think maybe from his perspective was one of those, kind of live and learn. So it was a matter of just the environment. It was kind of my choice. My mother allowed me to make the decision because I was a little older than my sister, who was much younger than me at the time. She's 5 years younger than me, and I decided that I wanted to stay in the city. Of course, I had my friends who were here. I've been here the majority of my life, up to that point, all of my life up to that point. So that's why I stayed in Detroit. And I think, your question regarding my father, it wasn't a matter of any neglect at all. It was just, I was growing up, and as a man, men kind of deal differently with their children than women do. And as a young boy, he kind of, gave me that leeway, to some degree.
And this, you're 100% correct, because as you said that, I was thinking the same thing. Especially those were back different times. We do parent our sons differently than we parent our daughters, and like you say, we kind of give our sons sometimes, more freedom to explore and to grow up. And so
Yeah.
and so it was just you and your sister.
Yeah, it was me and my sister. I also have two older siblings, and today actually my mother actually had another child while I was incarcerated. I have a younger brother, but I had two older siblings that are with my father by my father, but they weren't in the household. Yeah.
And so, as your father gave you more freedom, what were some of the things? What were some of the things that you were involved in that you weren't initially involved in
Mhm.
before the separation?
Well, I could say that I would frequent well, I wouldn't say frequent, but I had attended being 15 years old at the time, and I would go to like biker clubs. They had a biker club down the street that I would attend. Being out late nights, going to house parties, a lot of things that kids of our age that would do at that time. And it was kind of like it was unquestioned, should I say. I would walk in the house at 1 in the morning, and there wouldn't be, where have you been? It was kind of like my father was there. It was like, long as you're all right, everything good, I'm all right, okay, everything's fine. It was kind of one of those things. So just the freedom as far as, I guess, being able to come and go versus when my mother and my father were in the household. Of course, I was much younger, but there was no instance of me coming in the house at 1 o'clock in the morning with my mother and father in the household. I say
Right.
that.
So it wasn't necessarily that you was out in the shenanigans. You just had a little bit more freedom to go out and just hang out and just kind of do you a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that. But again, for somebody that's 14, 15 years old, in hindsight, that's just not appropriate. You know what I'm saying? And,
Right.
Uh, 'cause again, like I said, I was exposed to a lot of things that I otherwise would not have been exposed to at such a young age. I think that it caused me to mature a little faster than I otherwise would have. I would say that.
Right. So did you ever encounter any legal trouble out there? Did you get into trouble?
I didn't really get into trouble. I was involved in things, and it just so happened that frequently when I was involved in things, I wasn't the one to have gotten caught.
Right.
And so, but and it wasn't nothing, major. It wasn't something like I was like moving keys or anything of that nature. But as far as I remember a time like I was 15 years old, just hanging out on the block, and a couple of my partners, we just sitting out there. I'm about 15 years old, like I say, and the narcs come because I had one of my buddies, man. He was on I guess probation or whatever the case may be. We were about the same age, and so the narc kind of asked him, like, what you doing out here? My partner kind of got smart with him, like, man, what you mean what I'm doing out here, man? I'm doing me. You know what I'm saying? And the narc smacked him. You know what I'm saying? And like me
Hmm.
and my partners, me and my partners was like, just like couldn't believe it. Like, he do that? He just did that?
Yeah.
So he smacked him, and then, we kind of dispersed and went about our way. But like I say, that's not something I ever expressed to my parents. But again, these were things that were occurring as a result of me having that leeway and just being out, in the street, so to speak. I even experienced being robbed one time, man. I should just share this story with you, man. I recall one of my partners, man, my cousins, man. We had during Christmas time. I can't recall the exact year, but we were probably about the same age, 16 years old. And so we know that, being in Detroit, those are the times that you want to kind of like be out the way because you got a lot of people out there that's hungry. So you don't want to be in the streets, during late hours, especially during the holidays. So me and my partner, being on the west side, we had went to Fairlane Mall, which is located in Dearborn, which is on the west side, close to the west side of Detroit. And my parents, my father in particular, was like, you guys, take care, man. Stay in the house, be out the way. This ain't the time to kind of be out there like that. So we came with an ingenious idea to tell his mother, or ask his mother, is it all right if I spend the night at Fred's house? And she was like, yeah, that's fine. And then went to my pops, and kind of did the inverse. Hey, pops, is it all right? I can spend the night in my, Dominic house, my cousin name. And they both agreed. So as a result, while one parent believes that we're at the other parent's house, the other parent believes that we're at the other parent's house. We got a free for all. We got time to do what we want to do. We out.
Right.
And this particular night, man, we actually got robbed, man. We went to Fairlane Mall. It was me and four or five other my partners, my young partners, man. And we came back and probably like around the block from my street, we actually had got held up by some guys, three guys, man, gunmen, got robbed. And by the grace of God, nobody got injured. But we got robbed. I had my father's nice watch on and everything that was taken. But again, that goes back to just having that leeway and being out there like that. And I was exposed to so many different elements, during that time of my life. Yeah.
Basically, the dudes that robbed you guys, what were they seeking? Pretty much, in your opinion, just making you guys run your pockets, just whatever you had in your
Yeah.
on your possession.
Yeah, for the most part, man. Like I said, it was during Christmas time, and you got, if somebody hungry, man, it's that's the time that you're gonna be the hungriest, or that's what you're gonna be looking for, So we was out there, leaking, so to speak, and just went shopping. I think I had a partner that had just bought some at that time uh the forums. It was some Adidas. He had bought some Adidas, the forums, I think they were called. He some green and white forums. It was clean, man, and they riding in those, you know what I'm saying? It was just yeah, it was just a thing, man. Cause like growing up in Detroit, man, I know in the 80s, I recall it was really bad with starter jacket or leather jackets, starter jackets and patent
Uh-huh.
leather Adidas and things, guys were like literally losing their lives like daily behind those, man. You would see it on the news all the time. Somebody shot and killed for their leather jacket and patent leather Adidas. Somebody shot and killed. So it was like yeah, that was kind of like the era I had grew up in. Yeah.
And so, what did you end up, if anything, telling your father about the loss of the watch?
Well, when I told him about it, of course he wasn't happy. That's why you need to listen. You go through the same thing that the parents kind of tell you and everything like that. But of course he was happy that me and my cousin were still intact. There was nobody that was harmed. But yeah, we told him, and that's kind of how you got to deal with raising kids, man. They trial and error. You go through that.
Right. So, pops was pretty cool and lenient, though.
um, I wouldn't say necessarily. Well, I guess lenient. I mean, I wasn't like punished or anything about it. I expressed to him, and he just kind of like take that as a lesson. That's why I tell you to do these things, because I understand what's going on the streets. Kind of gave me that little lecture like that.
Right.
But it was still business as
Yeah.
usual as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
And so, let me ask you about your first trip to California. Now, before you came to California, were you, by that time, I'm assuming you were aware, you had heard of the Crips and Bloods, and
Yeah.
where did you come, and was it a big culture shock, or what was your initial thinking, like, oh, these Crips and Bloods ain't all that, or what was your mindset when you got your first up and personal look at them?
Well, I'll say this, man. I know. I think it was like in the late '80s, man. I remember I had one over my cousin's house, man. My cousin Luby, and he introduced me to NWA. That's what like my first introduction to West Coast rap, and I like fell in love with it. I like, oh, man, I'm feeling this, man. And so, as far as the Bloods and Crips, again, I had family that were located in Los Angeles, so I was aware of the Bloods and Crips even during that time, coming up. I actually even had a cousin. Of course, I had a cousin that was affiliated, actually, but I had a cousin that actually got shot, in LA during the, I think it was like the late '80s, late '80s, early '90s. So it was like it wasn't necessarily a culture shock because I was apprised of what was going on in Los Angeles, during that time. Yeah, so it wasn't really a shock or anything like that.
Hmm. And so, eventually you began to travel. You said periodically you would come to California and visit and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, I would come like every year. So what happened was I graduated high school in 1993, man. I went to McKinsey High School. I graduated, and I ended up moving to Ann Arbor, Michigan. I went to Washtenaw Community College. I tried to get in college and whatnot when I moved out there, and it just so happened. So one winter, it was very cold this particular winter. My aunt called me. My aunt, which was my she's rest in peace with my father as well, was a twin, my father's twin sister. So she called me on the phone and she was like, "Yeah, it's cold out here, baby." She's in California, and I was like, "Well, what's the weather? What you mean cold? What is it?" And she told me like, "Oh, it's like about 60 degrees." And I'm looking out the window, man. We got snow. We got like about 5 inches of snow. It's like 30 degrees below zero. I'm like, man, 60 degrees. Man, I'm about to move out there. I'm coming out there, right? And so, true to form, that following year, I think it was like February of 1994. I moved out to California, man. I was like, I'm done with the snow. I'm good. I love California because I had traveled out there prior to, and that was it, man. I was like, I want to, I'm going out there for the weather. And I also, I had a cousin that he was a Marine, and so I think it was like '93, early '93. I had went out to spend some time with my cousin, in San Diego. He was at Camp Pendleton. Beautiful time, man. And I fell in love with the, it's a beautiful scenery. The aesthetics are beautiful. The weather was just gorgeous. I mean, San Diego, man. I stayed in San Diego for a couple years, man. It's as you may know, they consider San Diego to be one of the best weather in the state of California, and it was beautiful. So I fell in love with it. And again, like I say, those two things, me going to Camp Pendleton and spending time with my cousin out there, and talking to my aunt when I'm in the middle of 30-degree below weather, I made the decision that California it is.
So you moved out to California around February of 1994. So what were you doing? Were you working? Were you hanging out?
Yeah. Initially, when I first got there, man, like I said, it was kind of like a visitation, but it was like, I'm gonna move out here, but it's kind of, if I get a job and I can establish something, I'll stay. If not, then I'll go back to the D. But when I went out there, I did initially get a job. I started working for, I think it was Carl's Jr. I started working for a little restaurant, Carl's Jr. restaurant, and then after I stopped working there, I ended up doing like some landscaping with a guy I had met. Trying to make sure that the income was coming in. So I did work. I did things and whatnot. I met as far as like you had asked earlier about the gang thing. A lot of my a few at least of my girl cousins, they were involved with guys that were affiliated, and so I kind of like started hanging with them. They were cool guys or what have you. And so again, like I said, because I was understanding of the culture of the gangs in Los Angeles, when I came out there, it wasn't so much of a shock. And again, when I was introduced to, some of my cousins' boyfriends or whatnot, they were affiliated. It was like, they were necessarily not no different than the guys that was back in Detroit. It was just that, out there, they gang bang blood and crip, but they was still like I said, in Detroit, there was hustlers, but it was all about money for the most part. So it wasn't nothing necessarily like a difference, I would say.
Right. And then so you move out to California in February, and then what, in the span of maybe 6-7 months, you find yourself in jail?
Yeah. Within the short span, man, I found myself in jail, man. Never thought it would happen. Like I said, I wasn't in the streets to that degree, but yeah, I found myself in jail, man. I ended up catching attempted murders, and I was sentenced to a total of 40 years to life. And just by the grace of God, that as you're probably familiar with the Senate Bill 260 and 261, which took into consideration a person's age prior to their incarceration, where I was able to go to the parole board earlier than I otherwise would have been, and I got a date. I got out.
So when had that bill not been put into place, when were you supposed to go to the board?
I was scheduled to go to the board in 2030, man. So technically, absent those things, those conditions, man, I'd be incarcerated still today. I would still have, what is it, 2023, 2024? I would still have 6 years before I'll be eligible for parole at this time.
Wow. And you done around 23 years, right?
That's correct. I did 23
Wow.
years.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
So
Thank God for that.
at the time of your initial incarceration, and you're facing all this time, what are you thinking? When you said you graduated in 93, I said, dang, I started doing the math in my head, and I didn't realize you were that much younger than me. And like I alluded to earlier, is because you was always so intelligent. You always carried yourself older than you was. You was way ahead of the dudes your age. So that's what I'm saying. I never assumed that you was 20 years old. So once you're caught up in this stuff and you're facing life, what are you thinking? Like, man, I didn't came to California and got caught up in a mess. What was your mind?
You know what? My mindset at that time, man, when I had got caught up, man, it was surreal. You know what I'm saying? Because let me say this. First of all, what I learned from that experience is that, of course, like the Bible says, man, you never know what a day may bring. And I certainly never knew or thought that I would be someone that be in a position to be doing time in the penitentiary, let alone life. So when that occurred, I just had to deal with the situation as it was, at that point. As far as my level of maturity, man, I think, like I said, because I was kind of exposed to so much at a young age, I would say that even at 15 years old, like, I still, even at that point, I thought more like a 21-year-old, you know what I'm saying, in terms of just having been exposed and knowing more so than what an average 15-year-old that's just concerned about playing video games at that time would be concerned with. So it was surreal, man. It was surreal. It was life altering, of course, but my mindset at that time was always that I gotta find a way to get up out of there, man. Yeah.
Right. And so what, you just happened to get caught up hanging with friends on a spontaneous shooting, and just next thing you know, you locked up, huh?
More or less. Yeah, more or less, man. It was more like it was described as a retaliation, a retaliation. And again, like I said, I was sentenced to 40 years of life as a result of attempted murders. Uh, and like I say, although I was not in the streets, I kind of dabble with respect to, you know, I was of the streets, but I wasn't in the streets. Let me say it like that. In terms of, and what I mean by that is I had one foot in, one foot out. You know what I mean? You know, because of
Right.
course, if I was completely outside of the streets, I wouldn't have found myself in that situation because I wouldn't have surrounded myself with people that were like minded, or should I say, involved in the streets to that degree.
And so let me ask you, Fred, because the county jail back then, because so you got arrested in around 94. By then, definitely the LA gang culture has made its way down to San Bernardino County, Riverside County. By then, Riverside County has a lot of LA gang members and a lot of gang members from Riverside County as well. And so the county jail was off the chain back then. So how did you did you ever encounter any problems not being a gang member?
I wouldn't say that necessarily kind of problems not being a gang member. Cause I will say this, man. Like even like when we had went to the penitentiary, man. California dynamics are a little different than other places, maybe with respect to at least during that time, as far as we were separated by race. And so, because of that, and of course, being that I was black, you know, I was embraced amongst the black inmates. So it wasn't a you know, it wasn't a matter of being from this gang or that gang, as far as my experience was concerned. You know, because of course I was like, and I was cool with you know, guys from the, you know, the blue side, you know, and the red side. You know, it wasn't an issue with me with respect to uh me not being affiliated. Yeah.
Right, right. Because I know, sometimes, especially in the county jails are not as structured as the prison. It's sad but true. Sometimes we pray on our own when a person is not affiliated and he does not have the backing of homies. So you never did experience anything like that, huh? In the
No,
county?
I can't say that I experienced that, man. Yeah, I never experienced like as far as like any Crips trying to run up on me because I was unaffiliated or Bloods either. You know, like I said, it was from my experience, man. I gave respect and I received it back in kind. You know, I would say it like that. You know, I never experienced because I was non-affiliate that I would have been victimized or anything of that nature. That's not something, and again, that's not to say that it doesn't occur, but that wasn't my experience. You know, I wasn't affiliated, but at the same time, I still gave respect and I received in kind from those that were.
Right. And so eventually, when you're convicted and you're given the time that they gave you, what was your mindset? Like, dang, man, I got all this time. Did you feel hopeless? Did you feel that eventually
Yeah,
you would
man.
get out?
You know what, Chill? Yeah, like you said, when I received that time, man, I did. I felt hopeless, man. I was like, I was young. Like I say, I was like 19, 20 years old, and getting that time, man, was. Let me say it like this, man. When you receive that time, if there was any, you know, what should I say, confusion about the reality of your actions will catch up with you. You know, those are thrown out the window. The reality is set before you. You are now sentenced to the California Department of Corrections for the duration of your life. You know, and for myself, being that young, man, it was life altering. You know, I couldn't believe it. You know, being that young, man, I can recall thinking that the most devastating thing of being sentenced to life at that stage of my life was the fact that I wasn't gonna be with another female, man. I mean, I'm young, man. I'm a walking hormone, so to speak, man. And it's like you telling me that I can't even touch a woman no more. I can't eat my mother's food anymore, man. And that was like painful. Uh I do recall that after having been sentenced to that, I kept hope because I was still on parole. I'm sorry, excuse me, not parole, but I was still on a appeal. So my perspective was that, you know, it's not over yet. I still have an appeal to go through, and once I go through the appeal, I'll be vindicated or whatever the case may be, and I'll have my time reduced, and I'll be back in society. But of course, that's not how it transpired. But initially, you know, you kind of like you hold on to anything that you can possibly hold on to, and that's what I held on to. That I was still on appeal. It's not finalized yet.
We both happened to be sentenced in the same county. And I used to hear a lot when I was in Riverside County things along the terms of, oh, Riverside County, they have 90% of their cases overturned on appeals. Did you hear anything like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think
Which
I
was
heard a
not
little bit
true.
about that.
Which was not true. Once we got to prison and we found out that was not
Yeah.
true. I don't know if those who said it because they was disillusioned about the law. What did you end up finding out about those who said things like that?
What I found out about them, about those that said that. Well,
Well,
I think you got to keep in mind though, Chill, because being incarcerated, man, and coming through the county jail and getting sentenced to all this time, man, a lot of people are disheartened, man. So I'm sure a lot of that stuff stemmed from there being wanting to hold on to something, man, have some type of hope. So
right,
it's easy to gravitate towards, hearing somebody just mention something that may not be true, but that may be positive in terms of you ain't gonna do all that time, or a lot of cases are overturned, and things like that. So I would say that a lot of that stemmed from that. Probably just wanting to hold on to something because it's hopeless, man. If somebody's sentenced to, especially during that time, as you know, people that were sentenced in the '90s in California to life, life meant life, man. Because you had 3 tiers of life sentences in California. You had 7 to life, 15 to life, 25 to life. I'm sorry, 4 tiers. And you also had life without the possibility of parole. And
right,
so those that were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, uh, often those that were also sentenced to 7 to life, 15 to life, or 25 to life had the same sentence. And what I mean by that is neither one of you were getting out. We were incarcerated during a time when Gray Davis was the governor, and Gray Davis, excuse me, had went on television and stated that there is a no parole policy in the state of California. So regardless if you had the possibility of parole or no possibility of parole, life meant life. So when I was incarcerated, there is essentially no hope in terms of getting out if you were sentenced to a life sentence.
right. And so as you're saying all that, right, I'm sitting here thinking, because a lot of the times the people who would say, oh, 90% of Riverside County cases get overturned on appeal, they were older dudes who have been going back and forth to the pen. So I'm thinking that now, me knowing better, I wouldn't spread false information to an individual. I would let him know what he's up against. So I just wonder why some of those dudes, gave us that false information. So you mentioned something that I wanted to ask you about too. Like you said, you were sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. So there's always that small hope. So how did you feel, and when did you learn that even though you had life with the possibility of parole, the way the parole board was set up at that time, there was no parole? Because it reminds me of, when I got to Salinas, I'm thinking that I'm getting out. A dude by the name of C. Looney said, oh man, if you got life, you ain't never getting out. What was your moment that woke you up that even though you were sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, the board was shutting all that down?
Yeah, I think I knew Looney too. Yeah, that's funny about Looney. But for myself, man, I recall in the '90s, man, there was a gentleman that he was going to the parole board. So they called him over the loudspeaker that so and so report to R&R for parole.
Now, is this at the time you're actually in prison?
Yeah, this is when I'm in prison, man. I was in
Okay.
Calipatria at the time, and
Okay.
so they called him. They basically said open his door up. I was a porter, as a matter of fact. I was a porter in I think it was 5 building at the time on B Yard in Calipatria. So they opened his door up and they was like, report to R&R, parole hearing or whatever. So, I'm on the floor and everything. I look up, at his cell. He closed the door back. I'm like, damn. You know what I'm saying? It's like, why would you do that? People talking about you going over here to decide whether or not you're gonna get up out of here or not. And he just closed the door back. And so up to that point, I was kind of dabbling in the law a little bit. And I come to find out that the reason he closed the door was because, aside from him necessarily being prepared to present his case to be paroled, like I said earlier, the state of California wasn't paroling nobody. So it's kind of like, I'm not about to go into that dog and pony show because I already know what the outcome is going to be. So he just closed the door. So it was pretty much early on when I got incarcerated and I came to the pen that I realized that, people weren't being paroled out of California, man. It was just like, life meant life, So I accepted it, but I didn't accept it in the sense that I was in the process of learning the legal system so that I can try to do everything that I could possibly do to get up out of there.
And that's deep. Let's expound on that and break that down a little bit more for the people out there that's never been to prison. So essentially, it got to the point in California with a lot of the convicts who had life, they knew that the parole board wasn't going to grant them a parole date. So and I've heard that a lot too. A lot of times people would refuse to even go to their parole board hearing because why am I gonna go over there and waste my time? So they shut the door. They wouldn't even go, or they go over there and cuss them out, talk crazy to them. And that's just, that just alludes to the mindset of how a person, when you feel you have no hope, the things that you do and the things that you don't do. And then also imagine being in a prison, a level 4, where lifers who have no hope. So the violence had to be just vicious, off the chain, and it was horrible, I'm sure. So what was that like, having all that time, being young, and being sent to a notorious California prison such as Calipatria?
Well, let me say this, man. Of course, it's not a situation that I wanted to be in, but I will say that after I had received the time that I had received, uh, I was intent on going there, and if ever I was going to be released from there, that I would be released in the same way that I had been received into the institution. What I mean by that is I was not going to be violated, and in the event that I were or that I was violated, whether that be sexually or otherwise, then I would not be out here standing with you today. That was my mindset, because I would certainly use violence to ensure that that wasn't, let it be known that that was not what time it was. And that's not to say that I was any tougher than any other individual. That was just a mindset that I was, that I had at the time, because I was sentenced to too much time, so much time, you know. So although it was traumatic in that sense, I also had to I had to have the wherewithal to understand that now it's time. It's time to be to survive. You know what I mean? And so I went into there understanding where I was going into, but with the mindset that I was also, if God said the same, that I was going to also get out, intact, the same way that I went in.
Right. And so once again, let's reiterate that Fred was not a gang member. He's from Detroit. He wasn't a Blood. He wasn't a Crip. And I can honestly say at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, the California politics just of Crips and Bloods alone, set aside the politics between the other races in the California prisons, was off the chain. So how was you how were you treated? Were you embraced being a non-affiliate? How were things for you at that time? Because I know, one of the first questions as Black men, sometimes we ask each other when we go to prison, is where you from? Meaning not what state you're from, what gang you're from. So how did that all play out for you?
That kind of played out for me, man, because I would tell people, like, if they did ask, like, where you from, I let them know I'm from Detroit, man. You know what I'm saying? It was like I'm not from California, I'm from Detroit. And again, the dynamics in California was more so based upon race, because as you know, the prison dynamics in California, people are separated by their race. You have your blacks, your Mexicans, your whites, and your others. And so, being that I was Black, it was kind of like, especially going to a higher level institution, that was primarily the overarching consideration with respect to your, not necessarily affiliation, but your group. And because I was Black, and of course I was young, it was kind of like, for lack of a better word, I was embraced as a result of being another Black person, a Black man, in prison.
And that's one good point that you made. Back at that time, Fred, when we came to prison as youngsters, shout out to all the OGs, the Crips, the Bloods who were Black back then, regardless of gang affiliation, they did embrace us, man. And I believe that, those OGs back then, they were raised in a different time to where it was family first, it was community first. And so, it's a difference of today when you have a youngster who will grow up from the age of 9 or 10 in that gang type of mentality, and where you don't care about nobody. But those dudes were different back then. And so, regardless of gang affiliation, we were embraced. So shout out to all the OG Crips and Bloods,
For
who
real.
did look out for us when we came, as opposed to nowadays, some of these dudes today who will be the OGs in 15, 20 years, they may not have the love that we was shown. And so
That's true.
do you remember who your first cellie was? And
It's funny, man. You brought that up because I was, I'm gonna tell you some story, man. When I went to Calipatria at this time, man, at Calipatria at some point was actually recognized as one of the worst prisons in the world. It was really rocking and rolling at that time. But when I arrived at Calipat, man, they put me in a cell where they assigned me to a cell with a gentleman that was, I think, I want to say he was like in the 113 or 114 on a lower tier. I never forget it. But what happened was you get off the bus, they take you to the yard you're supposed to go on. And they had us sitting out on the benches in the day room, and then the correctional officer would come around and let you know where your cell is, and you get your belongings, you go to that cell. So the officer told me the cell I was supposed to go to, I think it was like like I said, 113 or 114. I remember it was next to the shower. So I go to the cell, and they had an inmate in there, so I, go to the cell. He come to the door and everything, like, what's happening? And I said, yeah, man, I'm your cellie, man. My name is Frederick and everything. And he told me, he said, man, I'm a booty bandit. I'm on single cell status. I didn't I didn't quite catch him, man. I said, what you say? And he told me, yeah, I'm on single cell status, man. I'm a booty bandit. I said, oh man, don't say no more, right? So I went to the podium, man. I told the officer immediately. I said, look, man, we're not compatible, man. I'm not going up in there. And so, of course, the job of the CDCR is for ensuring that there's no, safety and security of the institution. So once they understood that I said that we're not compatible, they found me another place to go into. But that was my first experience, man, going to the cell, man. Is a guy told me that he was on single cell status because he was a booty bandit. Yeah.
Wow. And so
Yeah.
let me get a little deeper into that. No pun intended.
Yeah.
So later on, when you was there, did you come to find out, was he really a booty bandit? Or, because sometimes people will say that because people just want a single cell,
Right. Yeah.
I know that.
I didn't find that out, man. No, I didn't. I didn't find that out. I wasn't even concerned. Once you told me that, you ain't got to worry about it. I ain't about to go into it with you. But you're right, though. That is something that occurs. People want to remain in single cell status because, of course, you have your it's peaceful to some degree, man. You got your own cell. You ain't got to be concerned about being in there with another man, which is not one of the most enjoyable things if you have a choice. But yeah, I didn't even find out about that. Yeah.
Right. And so when they ended up moving you, where did you go? Who did you end up in the cell with?
Yeah, I ended up in a cell with an OG Crip, man. His name was Dre. I want to say he was from 8 Trey. I can't remember, it was so many years ago, man. But he was cool, man. Kind of like he embraced me, kind of laced me to what he could with respect to prison. But of course, as you know, when you're in the county jail, you kind of get laced to some degree about what to expect and how to do your time when you do get to the pen. But he was an older gentleman. He probably was in his 40s at that time. Like I said, I was about 20, and Dre was good people, man. Like I said, I think he was from 8 Trey Gangster, but I remember going up in there, and this was funny too, man, because when I was on the streets, I was a weed smoker. Of course, when you was on the streets in the 90s, man, we smoked blunts. You got, something big as your, thick as your thumb, you rolling up, right?
Right.
And when you're incarcerated, though, it's a little different, man. They have what you call pinheads. And at that time, when I was locked up, you can buy some weed, like a toothpaste cap full of weed would cost you about $10.
Right.
And you would have people that would roll up about 4 pinheads out of that toothpaste cap of weed.
Right.
So I remember he was like, man, you smoke weed? Yeah, I smoke weed, man. At this time, I hadn't smoked weed, since I was in the county jail for 8 months. So I'm like, yeah, I smoke weed. So he rolled up a pinhead and everything. I'm looking at it like, man, what I'm supposed to do with this?
Right.
I'm so used to smoking blunts, but surprisingly, man, that pinhead really did the trick. I don't know if it's because my system was so clean at that time or whatnot, but yeah, that's when I kind of was introduced to the mechanics of prison with respect to weed. It's a lot different, man. You ain't blowing like that unless you got it like that. But yeah, Dre, I was moved in there with Dre, and then shortly thereafter, I was moved in there. I was moved in another cell with another gentleman that was also unaffiliated. But yeah, I didn't have any issue regarding that being unaffiliated.
And so, if you can recall, what incident first opened your eyes to the dynamics of the racial hostilities in prison?
Well, the racial hostilities, of course, I already knew about the racial hostilities coming to prison because I dealt with some racial hostilities in the county jail. That was just it pretty much came with the territory. So as far as in the penitentiary, of course, there was one particular riot that occurred in the prison when I was on BR in Calipatria between the blacks and the Mexicans. I can't even say that was the first, but I do know that was one that I recalled. I think that blacks at that particular time had took off on the Mexicans in the education department on BR, and as a result, we were locked down. We were locked down for about a year as a result of that. Yeah.
Right. And I think during the course of a conversation with you, you told me you believe that riot, or if not that riot, but one of the riots was over a handball.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, man, I do recall it was. I think it was a handball because of course, you had the blacks would play handball separately from the whites and the Mexicans. And if I remember correctly, I think there was a handball that was hit over the fence because on the yard that I was on, the yard was divided between you had 1 and 2 building on one side of the yard, and you had 3, 4, and 5 building on the other side of the yard, and it was separated by a fence. And so I think the blacks, I don't know which side, but the blacks end up hitting a handball over the fence. And generally what occurs is when that happens, you have one of the inmates that will throw the ball over,
Throw
so
it
that they
back.
can have access to the ball, right. But at this particular time, if I remember correctly, it was stated that the inmate, I think it was a Mexican inmate, did not, send the ball over. He pretty much, he kept the ball. And I think it was something as trivial as that resulted in the blacks determining that okay, we're gonna take off because it's a sign of disrespect, and so they took off and they had a riot. And as a result of that riot, we were locked down again, like for a year, man. Back and forth melees and what have you. Yeah.
Right. And so let's hop into that a little bit, man, for people who've never been to prison. First and foremost, I didn't play handball in prison, but I did notice, because when the handballs were passed out, it was something that was much sought after because like a lot of times when people are playing handballs, the handballs are either eventually lost or maybe they run out of air, they don't hit as well. So handballs were a hot commodity. But think about this, man, for people that's never been to prison. These dudes went to war and risked life and limb behind a handball.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
crazy. And like Fred said, so it wasn't really the handball per se. It was the fact that we have a policy of mutual respect. When your handball comes on this side, we'll send it back, and vice versa. And so when the handball didn't return, the blacks, I'm assuming, felt that disrespected by whatever reason. Like, okay, these guys aren't just going to keep our handball, and so we're willing to risk life and limb behind a handball, man. And so for the people out there arguing who wins fights
Mhm.
between the blacks and the Mexicans, it just if we think about it, man, that's really small. When you're in a place when you're fighting over a handball.
Yeah. Well, let me say this. That is true. But I will say the thinking process when you're incarcerated, at least while in California, is respect is everything,
Right.
especially on the higher level that you are in. You'll find somebody, you might bump into somebody or step on somebody's shoe and immediately, oh, excuse me, the Mexican Spencer, it's like you immediately respond in such a way to where it's understood that no respect meant, all respect given, all respect given to the mistake that was done. And the reason for that is because prison can be a highly volatile, dangerous situation. And so respect is like paramount. And as far as something as small as a handball not being returned, resulting in people willing to give up their life, or should I, like you stated, it's a very volatile situation. Uh, the thinking is that if you give an inch, then they'll go a mile. And so in that regard, a handball today and tomorrow, okay, we want this area of the yard. So again, it all garners back to respect. There has to be a level of respect, and therefore, something as small as that, a lot of times, the thinking is to put that in check so that it doesn't go into something that is larger. You know what I mean? But again, it all boils down to something that it is small. Like I say, again, if you think about it, we were locked down for a whole year over a handball, and like you say, it's trivial, but it has a lot much more deeper meaning when you understand the dynamics of prison being all about respect. Yeah.
Right. And Fred, you broke that down. You broke that down eloquently. So describe what it's like on a year long lockdown when you're not coming out your cell, but every maybe 3 days for a shower, you're not doing anything. The food is being brought to you. Describe what it's like living like that.
Yeah. Let me say this: humans are creatures of habit. So, of course, initially when it occurred, it's not desirable. It never has been desirable to be locked down 24 hours a day. But in time, you kind of get a set program to where you're able to deal with it. You kind of like, they're gonna come with the meal at a certain time. You're gonna get your breakfast. At that time in Calipatria, they would give you your breakfast with your sack lunch. It was burgers on Saturday, pretty good burgers too. I remember those, man. And so you kind of get into a routine. And so, like my routine, I would work out in the cell. I would take the time to study, read in the cell, uh, write my letters in the cell. I had certain television programs that I would like to watch. I would watch those, at a certain time. But you had to come with a certain program, so to speak, to endure it, I guess, you know. And again, like I say, humans are creatures of habit. So after having done it so many times and it became your life, you know, it's not something that's desirable, but you do it, you know, you get through it. You know, you do it and you get through it.
And then let's mention, I think we should mention back then at Calipatria, what did you have? Maybe about 8, 9 television stations?
Yeah. You had a very limited amount of television stations at Calipatria at that time. And but like I said, you made do. You made do, man. You had your news. And of course the prison at that time provided movies every month that you could watch. So, you know, you had your movies that you can watch and everything like that. So it was yeah, you made do.
Right. And then you mentioned to me also about a black dude who was short to the house, and for whatever reason, he had some type of altercation and he ended up stabbing the CO.
Oh yeah. That was actually I had got to Calipatria, like I said, in I think it was like 95, October 95. And I recall there was a gentleman that was supposed to be getting out shortly. You know, I think he might have had less than 6 months at the house, if less than that even. But yeah, man, he for whatever reason, I don't know the full, you know, story behind why he chose to make that determination. I don't know if it was something that he had to do or he was called upon to do by his gang members or whatever. But he stabbed his CO. He stabbed his CO, being short to the house, and of course, he wasn't short to the house no longer after that occurred. But that was one of my introductions to the violence in Calipatria. You know, when I got there. Yeah.
And so, what was it like when you guys finally was released off that year-long lockdown? Was it a lot of tension? Was people nervous about the riot continuing?
Yeah, but you know, for the most part, man, you have you know, people kind of like talk it out, so you kind of know what to expect within reason. But I was actually one of the ones that was moved to a different yard because what they did is they started trying to move people, which they often do when there's a riot to that degree to where they feel like it's not going to succumb. You know, each side is going to continue to fight one another. They'll divide the prison up. So I was actually moved to a different yard. And I think they were also having an altercation up in Tehachapi prison at that time because the yard I was moved to, there were inmates from Tehachapi that were moved down there. And I think as a result of the same reason, you know, kind of trying to break up you know, what was going on in that institution. So when I came up, even on that different yard, there was a little, you know, everybody's kind of apprehensive about, you know, is anything going to take off? Everybody's kind of on pins and needles and keeping an eye on one another and what have you. So, you know, they had that there. That element was there.
90% of dudes rapping, they ain't nice as me. 98% ain't live the same type of life as me. The judge gave me life and then they sent me where the life is be. That level 4 with depth and vice, the type of stuff they like to see. 2 choices, fight or flee. I refuse to die a chump. I never been a mark, but damn, it's scary when that riot jump. I seen dudes cry, get pumped, or some sexually brutalized. Knew a dude who lost his life and he was only doing 5 year-long racial fights when homie all you do is ride. Lonely days and nights up in a hole causing suicide. From the moment you arrive, you see the Mexican mafia, AB skinheads with big giant swastikas, pro-black philosophers, the BGF, the Kumi, and Muslims who will murk you from the nation to the Sunni. That MS was loony, quick to ride up on they rival. Even Christians went to church, hide knives up in they Bible. Political and tribal, the Crips and Damus, the Long Beach, the Hubs and the Dubs and the Grooves, the IE, the Bakersfield, the Dago Pyrus, the hustlers quick to roll, the gangsters don't move. Whatever clique you choose,